Welcome to episode 515 of the Man That Can Project podcast. My name's Lockie Stewart, and as always, we're bringing you another unique and incredible guest, one that I've had the privilege of working with and been inspired by on a very, very regular basis. For those who are watching on YouTube, I've got his book right here, and for those who are following along on Instagram, you will see that we're giving away 3 signed copies of this book. Now, I read this book 6 months ago.
You're the first person I gave it to.
Yeah, well, I'm very grateful to, and then you've given it to Brad and a few other people. But the reason why I invited Kevin on the show was everything that I read through this, I was sitting there going, this is obviously awesome for my business. However, so many of the questions that you ask, and I think questions are what help us get more of what we want out of our life and help us understand more of who we are. The questions that you were asking, I was like, I can put this into my own personal life, from relationships to health to my purpose, all things that a lot of people who listen to this show are looking to improve upon. And I was like, let's just pull some of these chapters apart and see what happens. Now, Kev, you've got a wealth of experience, been in the industry for 30 odd years.
Yep.
For people who want to go check out his Instagram, all the links will be in the show notes at the end. But definitely go do that. There's some brilliant YouTube videos as well on branding and brand principles and marketing and just everything. But I am very honored to have you here today, and I look forward to diving into a few of these chapters. Now, some ones that we're going to cover, but don't hold us too accountable if we don't get there, if we go off on a segue, but design is deliberate. That can transfer into designing your life as deliberate.
Yep.
Brand principles in action. Now, we've got 5 brand principles here that we'll play with. 6 deceptively difficult questions. Now, I want to get these questions out to you, and I hope that you write them out throughout the show and use them in your own life. And some of them are very confronting.
Yep. And
we'll dive into that in a moment. But I do want to start with who the book's dedicated to. It's beautiful. I did have the page folded, but now I've lost it. Here we go. Right. There we go. There's also a little note to me in the front, but I won't read that for everyone. So, my son, who helps me see the world through the curiosity of a child, who challenges and teaches me every day, who reminds me to keep things simple and to follow my heart, and who is forever showing me the importance of a brighter future. Ilian. Man, how does it feel having all the intellectual knowledge that you have amassed over the years into one well-written book?
Relieved.
Yeah.
Would be a... Yeah, look, there's a couple of things on that. Number one, it took 3 years to write it. I'd been kicking around these 15 brand principles for since 2003. And when I thought about writing it as a book, I thought I'll be done in 6 months, because I bring it in my design practice. I'm talking about it every day. I have really, really kind of meaningful, long conversations with business owners. So I thought 6 months. It took 3 years to just write it, and it took another 1.5 years to just get the partnership with Booktopia to get it published, to do find a printer, to get everything organized. So 4.5 years in total. So when I say it's a relief, it's like, oh man, I was working on this for a long time. But that dedication that you read out, there's 3 main reasons that I wrote the book. One was for business owners. I'm surprised and thrilled that it has resonated with the design community and designers, but I wrote it for business owners because I thought I've had the benefit of, like many others, 30 years of having conversations with business owners. So what have I learned? What are the patterns that I could then just hopefully translate over to business owners to help them? The second reason I wrote it was because I was trying to debunk this myth that designers build brands. We have a lot of people in my field who go out and they sort of market themselves as, oh, we build brands or we create brands. And I was saying that's not true, because it's business owners and staff and customers who build brands. And as designers, we have a role to play. It's an important one, but we don't build brands. And also there was this myth around, if you've got a logo, you've got a brand. So I want to demystify that.
Yep.
But the third reason, which goes to reading out the dedication, was in doing the book, the reason why it took longer than I thought was I started to delve into where trends in the 21st century are heading, what the future looks like. And it just kept reminding me that this is my son's future. It's his generation's future. And businesses and brands have a huge role to play in what that's going to look like for my son. So the dedication not only was, he inspires me every day, it was, this is really about where the future is going to head. And I'm not saying I've written about the future, predicting it, but all the patterns, all the signals are heading in this direction, and it has a big impact on the next generations.
And the beautiful thing is, you've taken so long to carefully think about this using past experiences, but also thinking about the future, which I think is important, an important skill set and principle for life. And when we then think about being deliberate, you've written here on the chapter, and I love this, and this will tie into where we're going next, but for businesses, so obviously chapter, which is design is deliberate, and you got this from, well, I'll read the very first part. In one of my conversations with the late Dr. Edward de Bono, he provided me with the best definition of design I've ever heard, one that I subscribe to and abide by to this day. Design is deliberate. And that's powerful. And then you wrote later on in the chapter, or early on in the chapter, for businesses that have successfully become brands, they've done so deliberately by focusing on aligning their purpose and value proposition with the needs and desires of their customers. Now, for me, when I was reading that, I was like, okay, well, purpose, value. What's my purpose? What value do I have to offer? And how can I then position that in my environment? And I thought about that. Many people, the question they're asking themselves is, what is my purpose? It's a very big buzzword at the moment. And I thought, okay, well, maybe I could start with what value do I have to offer, and to what community do I want to, I guess, put that in, and then I can define my purpose based on that. Because for some people, I guess I want to break this down. For some people, it can be very overwhelming because you don't have self-esteem, or you don't think you have much to offer, which I didn't in the beginning. That's how I thought about myself, but I attached myself, or I subscribed to, my purpose is to make $1 million. That was all I needed at that point. But because I gave myself something to work towards, something that I felt was bigger than myself, I learned a lot along the way. I grew. I surrounded myself with, highly people who were where I wanted to be, and it made me recognize my value because I was upskilling.
Yep.
That was very deliberate.
Yep.
Prior to that, I was just sort of like a bit of tumbleweed blowing down a desert track.
Yeah.
And I guess I want to unpack this with you a bit more. A question that you wrote is, what do I need to achieve, and what must I do to achieve that? Very simple, very powerful.
Yeah. Yep. Well, it was interesting because for those who don't know Edward de Bono, he's the guy who sort of coined the phrase lateral thinking, among many others. But he spent 50 years in his professional practice. He was a doctor of neurology, I think, and he was trying to teach thinking as a skill. So he was like, there's a myth out there that, we're not creative. We're born creative, or we've got to find creative people who'll do creative things for us. And he said, that's ridiculous. We all have creativity. Some do it professionally, and others just do it every day. And he said, but you can actually think, you can teach thinking as a skill. So in my conversations with Edward, I was saying, how do you define design? And I was expecting this really kind of thought-provoking, long,
profound.
Yeah. and the interesting thing is, it was thought-provoking and profound in its simplest form. And why I think it's incredible is that when he said those 3 words, design is deliberate, it doesn't have creativity in there, or artistry, or vision, or it's a very practical breakdown, which I think is profound, because that's applicable in anything. And as I say in the book, whether you're designing a logo, or a business, or a fitness program, or an app, or a city, or an economy, you're taking deliberate steps to an outcome. So those 2 things, what am I trying to achieve, and how do I get there? When we're going through the design process, if you're saying, I'm going to create a fitness program for Sarah, or I'm going to create a business model for Sam and her business, we will look deliberately at what the context is. We will look at the challenges and the opportunities, and we will take very deliberate steps to an outcome that we have previously defined. That doesn't mean we're going to get to that specific one, but it's a direction that we say, that's where we want to head. And around that, we can shift and pivot and adapt. It's what I call the difference between creativity, which is fearlessly inventive, and strategy, which is sort of a long-term goal of where we want to head to, and then tactics are the deliberate steps we take to get there. And when we look at those three things together, deliberately, we start to just totally change how we're approaching things. And I guess the thing for our viewers and listeners is probably to consider is that we do a lot of things deliberately, but they're subconscious. What we're talking about here and what Edward's talking about is when we do them consciously, like you just described. You consciously said, this is what I want to do, and here's how I'm going to get there. It can change, but I have a plan, and it's deliberate. That as a conscious act is how design can be translated into a creative act, like doing a logo or a website, through to designing a business, through to anything we do. And I love that about design because it makes it democratic, it makes it accessible, and it makes it, from my point of view, really clearly understood as to how we can implement design in any situation.
When we think about intent, I know for a long while, I guess I had it linked with manipulation to a degree, because I was like, okay, if I want to be intentional with how I would love my relationship to be, could that come across as manipulating? The same with, and I've thought about this and I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. If someone were to think, that's manipulating, or you're overthinking things, what are your thoughts about that?
Well, I mean, put simply, if we're manipulating a situation, we're doing it deliberately. That's because we're thinking, this is the outcome that I want to engineer, and I will deliberately get there. So, if we're talking about design and being deliberate, it's a tool. It can be used for good or not good. So what we say here, and what Edward's talking about, is when we're trying to design for an outcome, we're doing it deliberately, and we should be doing it consciously. Now, if we start to say, I'm deliberately trying to create an outcome that I want to work towards, that I will benefit from, and others may or may not, but at least I'll benefit from, well, then that starts, and if we're doing it consciously, that starts to hopefully bring in our values and ethics, and start to say, well, if I'm deliberately designing something for an outcome that will only benefit me, or I'm only going to look at the benefits that I'm happy with selectively for other people, I'm going to ignore maybe some of the collateral damage it could create, well, then that becomes a values and ethics conversation, not a design conversation.
Like that.
But when you are doing it deliberately and doing it consciously, it should automatically bring into that sort of process, what else is happening here? What else are we doing? What else am I trying to achieve, and how am I going to achieve this? And who else will benefit? And that comes back to, or doesn't come back to, it comes to what we'll probably talk about later, is what I talk about impact.
Yes.
And a lot of people talk about impact, and they say, the impact that I want is on this thing or this situation or this community. And I look at impact differently, and we'll use this design as deliberate analogy. So when I talk about impact, I talk about dropping a pebble into water. And the immediate impact, that first ripple, is who we intended to. So let's say it was, in your analogy, what I wanted to get out of this, and there's my impact. Wow, cool. But when we start to look at it consciously, what happens in the next ripple, and the next ripple, and the next ripple? And we need to be thinking about that deliberately in how we design anything that we do, because that draws into the process. What is the impact of the outcome that I'm seeking for myself, and who else may benefit or not?
Yeah.
It gets a bit deep, but
I think it's awesome to talk about, and this is why I really, really encourage everyone who's listening to read this book, and not just because I've been telling people to read it before we've had this conversation, because it breaks all of these things that I believe, or I've been thinking about a lot, and you've just given me more questions to ponder, so to speak. But that metaphor you gave, where it's the pebble in the water, and then the ripple effect of what does X, or how does X impact Y, for example.
Yeah.
I think about so we look at like 3 buckets. We've got 6 areas of where we want to help with health, but I believe, because predominantly men will want to be the protector and provider, so they go all in with their career, and I've been guilty of that. But the sacrifice that they don't consider until it's too late is their relationship and is their health. Now, when you're not feeling healthy, meaning energy, or you're not feeling strong and confident in who you are, or mentally strong and confident, that impacts your mood, which impacts, if you're moody when you go home to your partner or to your children, how do you think they feel about that? Same with, then the impact of not having a very happy home life impacts your work, and it's all connected. So that ripple effect, and bringing it back to, I guess, the first point in that of design is deliberate. I always believe in starting with how I need to be. You do the exact same thing. You're very, very deliberate and very, very consistent in so many things that you do in your life, and I've had the benefit of watching that. But for an individual, how do you need to show up, or how do you need to look after yourself so that you are the best in business, the best in your relationships in life?
And the kind of, it's not rocket science in a way, but we find it so hard, is that it's all connected, right, as you say. And I think that for me, it's taken me a while to and there's a specific kind of way that I got here, and I'll talk about it. I have to look at it, and I have to say to myself, if I'm not healthy, then how can I show up every day for my son who needs me, and I want to be here for him, and my wife and everyone and my friends. So I need to be healthy. And that's not, I need to be an absolute fanatic, militant health nut. So no, I just need to be healthy as I can. So I deliberately design into my day a gym session. Not because I have to fit it in. So no, that is part of my work, because I'm working on myself. So my working day includes gym time that is working on myself, so I can perform in everything else in my life. That's kind of part of how I look at health. The other thing is that when I'm looking at work, I say we can get really fanatical about it, and we can get obsessed about it, and we can get consumed with it. And I say to myself, and I've had to get here, transition to this, and say, that's a very shallow kind of way of looking at the world, because it's very one-dimensional. It's kind of monoculture. It's just work. And yes, we can say, but we're providing, and we show up, and we love it, and we've got passion. And I say, yeah, but what else is going on? So for me, I deliberately design into my day time with my son. I do all the pickups, I do all the drop-offs, I go to all of the after-school kind of events and things, because I want to be there for my son, and I want to be there to see him grow up and to be his biggest cheerleader. So for me, I designed my day deliberately that my working day is a full day, but my job, my kind of practice is about 5 or 6 hours. And then I've got an hour and a half in the gym, and I've got other time if my son needs me. Not always. If he does, I'm available. If he doesn't, I keep working. But I stop at 6 or earlier. Like I'll stop at 3 if I've got to pick up my son from school. I can come back and work a bit more, but I'll stop at 5:30. And it's rare I work on the weekends. And there's a reason for that, because I'm then not burnt out. And why do I only work 4, 5, 6 hours a day? Is that I can make decisions quicker, because I'm not burnt out, I'm not tired, I'm not like feeling like it's a grind. It's something that I really enjoy doing, because I've got other things in my day which I've deliberately designed.
And for those who are listening who maybe don't have if you are working for someone and you don't have as much control over your hours, my thought process would be then be deliberate with your design. If that's not fitting with your lifestyle, maybe look at other options for yourself rather than just staying stuck. Because a lot of people do just go, this is it, I accept that, poor me.
Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with saying and that's a really good point. If you're working for somebody, or you're working in a company, and I'm lucky enough to be in control of how I use my time, there's nothing wrong with going to your boss or your seniors and saying, I would like to be working 9 to 5 or 9 to 6, because I don't want to get burnt out, and I want to be here showing up every day to do my absolute best, and that can only happen if I've got downtime and a social life and a healthy kind of I wouldn't say routine as such, but a routine is good. But if you got a sort of a sense that I want to be able to go to the gym in the morning or in the evenings, whatever suits you, and if you're, I have a very kind of specific view on this. If you're working in a company and your boss is saying you need to be here at 8, you need to leave at 8, my advice would be look for another job.
It's funny, Gardy, who I had on the podcast on Saturday, said the exact same thing. Yeah. Because for his employees, he's a bit more flexible. He's like, Johnny, for example, wants to do his school drop-offs and pick-ups, so that's how he does things. And I'm accommodating with that because I know if he's being fulfilled in that way, he's going to perform better in the workplace, which is important.
Yeah. It's funny, 2 very quick stories here. One is when I used to work in live in Sydney, I was working in Saatchi & Saatchi, part of the big global advertising network, and I was the joint creative director of the design team, and we had a policy. You know what work you have to do? This is pre-COVID. This is in the early 2000s. You know what work you have to do? Come in whenever you want, leave whenever you want, as long as you get the work done. And if you need help, put your hand up. That was our policy.
Very simple.
That was policy. Guess what happened? Everyone showed up at 9 and left at 6. Because they said, I want to be around everyone, and when I put my hand up, I want to be with you and talk to you directly. And okay, post-COVID, that can happen remotely now. But the interesting thing that we found, that I saw, was that when you, this is back to deliberate design, you can't design culture, but you can design the circumstances for a culture to thrive. And we designed a sort of the context for people to be as free with their time as they wanted to, with a work ethic was get the work done, and with the support that we're here if you need us. And they showed up on a regular day work. They weren't saying, oh, come in at 12 and leave at 3.
Yeah.
Great. No, they were in, and we all enjoyed it. The second thing is when I left Saatchi's, I was doing an identity for a recruitment agency in Dublin.
Yep.
This is when we were living in the top end of Western Australia in East Kimberley. And they were going the traditional route of how do you promote a recruitment company? You know, we have the best jobs, we have the best listings, and blah, blah, blah. And it struck me, I went, you know what? Your positioning, your whole message should be 2 words. The company was called Prosperity, so that kind of gave a sense of we want everyone to prosper. But I said, your positioning, your whole mindset, your whole attitude should be 2 words. Happiness works. So when people are happy, they're going to work. When people leave a job, they're either unhappy or circumstances mean they have to leave, but they might be really upset that they have to leave because I love it here. When people are happy and they're working, the company is more productive. The employer has more productive staff. So this sort of old school 20th century dictatorship ruling of a company, I'm the boss, you're you
work for me, you do as I say.
No, that's gone. Because when people are really happy, it just explodes in productivity. So that's kind of what underpins the book. Because for listeners and viewers, there are no real answers in the book because it is more about a mindset and an approach. And that mindset and approach can be applied in something as simple as 2 words for an organization. They ended up having those 2 words embedded in their DNA. Happiness works. They used to say, Mondays we love, and they would get CEOs of organizations and companies in every week on kind of a podcast sort of style and talk about how happiness is embedded in their company and how productive it can, what the value of that is. So they embrace those 2 words because, as you say, if you're in a company that they are pushing you to work ridiculous hours and not paying you perhaps, or you're just getting burnt out or hating it, maybe it's time to look somewhere else.
That's why I try to instill in our members within our community to do it for today, do something today to be better for tomorrow.
Yeah.
Because it's, okay, it might be that daily deposit in your relationship today because, so many people, an example could be their wife's just walked out on them, they'll go, Lockie, I need help with this, how do I get it back? I'm like, okay, we'll talk about it, but chances are it's been happening for the last X amount of years because you haven't been invested in it.
Yeah.
You become complacent. And I think when you think about the overall intent and what we're all here to do, we're very fortunate. We love what we do from a career standpoint. We're also both very aware of how much time our relationships need and what we want to give and receive in that situation. Same with health, give and receive. And I know that I'm doing that now. Not, I do love feeling fit and confident. I love crushing some weight every now and then or running 5Ks. But I'm also thinking about how things are going to be when I'm 80. Career probably won't be the focus, but my relationships will be, my health to look after grandkids or to be able to have awesome adventures. And that starts with that design point. And one other thing in that chapter that I quickly want to touch on as well was a question. This never read anything like this or thought about this because I've just been like, I'll wait for someone else to do it. How do I need to think to produce something that is not yet here?
Yeah.
That is out of the box.
Yeah, and you know what? It's just on what we were talking about earlier about all the things we have to consider and juggle, and it can sound overwhelming, but it goes back to this mindset. It's that I don't need to have all my time, energy in one box, which is work, or in my relationship, my work suffers. We just need to look at it and say balance. It's not rocket science, balance, right? And when it comes to, creating something that wasn't there before, that was the other part of my conversation with Edward de Bono, because we were talking about creativity and design, and he was saying, well, there's a chapter in the book about two types of thinking, analytical thinking and design thinking or creative thinking. Analytical thinking is always looking at what has been there. You're analyzing data, you're analyzing what has been created, you're analyzing the past to this point today, because it's there. It is in existence, and you can look at it and you can assess it and compare and contrast that. Creativity and design is what can be, what if, what isn't there, what can we create that is new or different. And again, that might sound overwhelming, but when you look at anything in the world that has been redesigned, they usually say, this is what's in existence, we can improve it. That's a redesign. And that wasn't there before, because you're improving on what was there. And that's another thing about, there's a great section in the book on hacking. And we think hacking is like some dude in a hoodie in a darkened basement, taking down the next corporate victim, right? But hacking is a really, really creative way to explore how we can create something that wasn't there before, by either taking things that are in existence and merging them into something new, taking something that's in existence and saying, how can I improve that to it becoming something new? Or in some cases, just going, wow, let's just create something totally out of the box. And that doesn't happen as often as we think. If we look at some of the best sort of big watershed moments in culture and business and technology, let's look at the iPhone. All right, everyone's like, ooh. That wasn't the first. Just the best.
Yes.
Let's stick with Apple, the iPod, right? That wasn't the first MP3 player. It's just the best. And that was them saying, how do we create something that is in existence but improve the experience, improve the technology, improve whatever it might be, and then you're creating new. With that in mind, we have to be humble and say, when we're creating something new, it could be a tweak, it could be a sort of an adaptation, it could be observing patterns that are in other areas and pulling them together. Wonderful. But we're standing on the shoulders of giants. We're looking at what happened previously and making something that progresses us all forward or progresses a community forward. So again, this act of designing something new doesn't need to be overwhelming. It's a mindset, it's an approach that we say, can this be better than it is? can we challenge the status quo? Can we add value? We're designing something new.
And for the process of doing that, it requires the skill of thinking, as we were talking about in the very beginning. Thinking and also communication are two skill sets that we don't really intentionally do.
Well, there's a again, and we talk about in the book, is that there's one thing to have this great vision and to see the future in a really inspiring way, and that's great. The big part of that is to bring people with you. And how do you bring people with you? You communicate it. You make it compelling. You make it understood. You make it, they can see the benefit in it for themselves. And that's all communication. It's all about that. There's a way I talk about this, and we are kind of going off on tangents, but it's relevant, is that businesses go out into the world, brands go out into the world, and they tell their story. We are an amazing company. We are so innovative and we're so progressive, or we've got heritage and legacy, and we've been around for 100 years, and we do this and we do that, and that's our story. And it's important and it's wonderful. And people don't give a shit. They go, and the reason why is that people don't really care about your story. They only care about where your story shows up in their story. And that's when communication comes into it. That's when you say, we've got this incredible new design thing or this new value that we want to offer to you. And it's important to you because here's where it shows up in your life. And that means you need to understand their world as a customer or a community. You need to see where what you're bringing into the world is going to impact them positively. And they're going to see relevance in that. And they're going to transact with you. And they go, this is cool because I understand it. It's relevant to me. And I know where your story shows up in my story. I'm gonna transact. If it's, I've got this stuff, you should buy it because I want your money.
It's direct, but
but you see, that's what communication. It's one in the delivery, and a lot of people then start talking about marketing spin, but you get caught out on that, particularly these days. So I think when you go and say, here's where our story shows up in your story, and our story doesn't take up your entire life from when you wake up to when you go to sleep. It only takes up here, but that's important, and we would like you to consider that us over competitors because we think we can do that really well because we've either adapted it or we've created something new or we've hacked it into something more interesting for you or it's very relevant to you. And I say we don't need to have everyone as our customers. We probably want a certain kind of everyone. And that's who we're looking for.
And I think that's very relevant for finding out who you want to spend time with in your life as well.
Yeah.
You mentioned the value that you can get from people or specific talking to a specific audience. It's much like when I shifted my social circle based on not people who I've always been around just because that's comfortable, but more around people who were going in the direction or had results and outcomes that I was looking for. I then got to start thinking in a way that they thought. I got to watch their behaviors. I got to think about questions that they were asking themselves, and it helped me create a more compelling future, one that motivated me, one that excited me. And I think that's a good point to add on that. And that's obviously one of the 6 deceptively difficult questions as well as 2.2. So who are you talking to? Point 3 is what are you saying? And point 4, what channels are you using? Where are they hanging out?
Yeah. Well, a couple of things on that. The first is that it's really important for us to be, I'm not saying you're doing this, but it's important for us to not kind of go, I'm going to dump these people because they're not going where I'm going. I'm only going to hang out with the people that are going where I'm going. I think the way we think about it is we gravitate towards kindred spirits. And over time, some people in our life might be heading down a different path and we might love them to bits, but we just drift apart because they're going one way, we're going the other way. That doesn't mean that we've dropped them or anything. It just means that we gravitate to those kindred spirits. And there'll be, I think, a healthy social network is when not everyone's heading the same direction you are, but there's enough people who keep you grounded, and we'll connect with them on common ground, shared values, circumstances, whatever it is. But again, deliberately singling out certain people who you can learn from and adapt towards and say, right now in my life, that's a kindred spirit that I want to gravitate towards a bit more at the moment, versus I'm going to get rid of everyone else because they're not in that camp.
I put my hand up. I did do that in 2014, 2015. It was the first time I'd been exposed to, I guess, personal development. And I believed I was growing at such a rapid rate. I was so excited by all the things that I was learning and the changes that I was making. I was like, I'm better than everyone. And if you're not on this journey with me, bugger off. And unfortunately, I did cut a lot of people out. And I learned, I think it was around 2016, I was like, man, I don't have any friends anymore. Everyone's gone.
Well, the people he had left were acquaintances.
Correct. And Jim Rohn said it best, where he's like, there'll be people that you need to completely disassociate or remove from your life because they only bring...
Yeah, they're toxic or they're negative.
Correct.
Yeah.
And that's, once again, that can be hard to do because they may have been age-old friends. The second is like the distance, and not because you're better or worse. It's just at the moment you want to prioritize time over here, and it's for whatever reason. And then there's the enhancement. Who are the people? And I loved what you said, where it shouldn't all be the same kind of people, the same way of thinking, because you do need to be challenged, but you also need a break.
Yeah, and you need to be grounded by people who you just say, you know what, every time I see you, you're the kindest person around, and you, like, it's just this unconditional kindness that is a real injection in my day. Or you smile. And I was like, oh, gee, you just bring light into my life. And you're doing something completely different. And I'm on a different path, but what you bring into my day-to-day cannot be matched by these other people that I've got that are going in a certain way. So that's kind of, I think, something to be mindful of. And this, back to the questions, is I'll run through the 6 questions because they get us into that sort of. So the first question, and I ask the business that I work with, and also just people when we're talking about how to position ourselves, I guess. 1, what value do you provide? And that's a very difficult question to answer because it's not value for money. It's what is it that you're going to bring to someone's life or their business that they really go, yeah, I can't get this anywhere else, or I can't get it the way you give it to me anywhere else. That's the first question. What value do you provide? Secondly, who are you talking to? People say everyone because they want to have a wide market. And I say, awesome. So you're speaking to 3-year-olds and 96-year-olds? And they go, of course not. I said, so not everyone. So who are you talking to? Be specific. Not demographics. What kind of person are you talking to? Are they progressive? Are they traditional? Are they conservative? Are they innovative? What kind of person? Third, what are you saying? So if you know who the kind of person or your customer might be, what are you telling them? So what's your message to them? Number 4, what channels do you use? So where do they hang out? What do they like to read? What do they like to listen to? Where do they go to get their information? Or where do they go, or how do they like to receive information? And the thing I always like to say to them is, you might say, oh, channels we use are EDMs and events. You go, great. Have you asked them if that's how they like to get their information? Because if they like it somewhere else, that's the wrong channel, or you need to add a channel. So what channels you use isn't like we use them, full stop. It's what are you using, and are they the ones that these people like to use? The 5th question is where ego comes in. We say, can you live up to it? And they go, oh, of course, doing this for years. Go, okay, where's the proof? So if you can live up to what you say and the value you provide, where is the proof that you can live up to what you say? And then the last question, number 6, is the toughest one. It's the one that usually is like a punch in the face for people. It's so you've told me what value you provide. You told me who you're talking to. You've told me what messages you're giving them. You told me what channels you're using. Great. You told me you can live up to it. Awesome. Why should anyone care?
That was the one that got me.
So if you shut down tomorrow, would you be missed? And what's interesting about these 6 questions isn't like that's just you got to answer these questions and figure it out, and you got to, they care about you. The answer to question 6 should be the same question. Answer to question 1: what value do you provide? Because if you're providing real value, and you shut down tomorrow, you'll be missed. If the value that you provide in your customer or your community or your market is so valuable and so relevant to them and so specific to the world that they operate within, and you shut down tomorrow, you would be missed. Now, they might be able to find a competitor or an alternative, but you'd be missed. And people care because the value you provide goes to the people you've identified or your customer. They know what you're telling them. It's clear. You're reaching them in the ways they like to be reached, and they understand how they can be reached. You live up to it in their mind, not in your mind, in their mind. And if you stopped, you'd be missed. So that's why those 6 questions are a little feedback loop. And I would recommend you do those a few times. And we have there's an example in the book of a hypothetical. You could run it through and see the differences.
I loved that example. But the question number 1 and 6 took me back to when I mentioned I wanted to earn $1 million. That was now my purpose that I decided on. And I recognized very quickly that I didn't have people in my circle of influence who'd earned that much money. So I was like, how do I even do that? Is that possible?
Yep.
And when I was like, I need to hang out with millionaires, I then thought about that. What value do I have to provide them? Bugger all. Like, I don't even like hanging out with myself currently. I didn't like who I was at that point in time. So rather than sort of dwelling on that and going, that's never going to happen, I pretty much asked myself, what value do I provide and what value can I offer them? And that's when I got to work. I started, as I mentioned, that hardcore journey of understanding who I was, what value I can provide. And it started happening clear on who I was talking to, what I was saying, the channels that I was using. Can I live up to it? I still do practice what I preach. I don't try and be anything else. And we'll talk about this as well, why brand is more than just a logo. It's so much more than that, and ties into anything else. And why should anyone care? For me, that question, when I was reading the book a couple of months ago, I was like, man, that's a tough one. That's deep, because a lot of people, and data shows around mental health issues and challenges like that, a lot of people don't think people care about them. But they don't ever bring it back and circle it back around. It's like they don't feel like they have value. Everyone has value. What needs to shift is your belief on yourself, the perceptions on how you see yourself, and that's a skill set to develop in itself.
And what's kind of cool about those 6 questions is that when you say, do I matter, or why should anyone care about me? It's really, ego, it's arrogance, it's doubt, it's imposter syndrome. You get caught up in that sort of hamster wheel of just, oh God, I've got to push through. And why these questions work is that you can actually stop thinking about that and just go back to question 1 and say, if I just focus on the value I provide, whether people care or not will take care of itself. I don't need to be stuck in that. I just need to be over here in the value. If I want to actually just think about how can I show up in people's lives, how can I add value to what they're doing, whether they miss me or not is up to them, not me.
Correct.
I just have to try to get as much value. So it actually takes that pressure off of having to be, really important, and people have to care and I'll be missed, and
needing all the validation.
It's like, no, just go to question 1. Question 6 will take care of itself. So that's why those 6 questions actually help, just 1, communicate and structure how that might be, but 2, takes the pressure off. And at the same time reminds you of how important the answer to question 1 is.
And 2 of the most undervalued skills is communication and thinking, or even 3, and listening.
Well, yeah.
So if you want to just surpass so many people, go, Google, how can I improve my communication, or how can I learn to think better, or how can I read this book, or read How to Win Friends and Influence People, and just start there and start practicing that with your mum or your buddies or your siblings.
That whole listening thing is really interesting. There's a really, I found it kind of a shallow way of thinking about it, but it's a really clear way of thinking about it. Is I can't remember who it was, but some billionaire person, and they said, so how did you become so wealthy? And he said, I asked people what they wanted and I gave it to them. That's it. I listened. I looked at what they were looking for. I created value that was relevant. This is the long answer. I created value for what they're looking for, and then I promoted it and communicated through the channels that they could see it because it's got to be visible. And they went, oh, that's interesting. And then they bought it and they knew that they wanted it. And then all of a sudden he became a billionaire.
Why do we overcomplicate things?
Well, there's another chapter on simplicity in the book. We overcomplicate things because we think that when something's simple, it's lacking. So we, over time, we add complexity to make it sound more kind of thoughtful, or make it sound more deep. And I think that simplicity is so undervalued, and its importance is, underrated, that we need to sort of go, if this can be really simple, people can grasp it or they can interact with it. One of the greatest things about the iPhone was not necessarily because it was simple, because another sort of definition of simple is intuitive. So it's intuitive. That is a version of simplicity. So simplicity isn't let's make it simplistic and dumb it down. Simplicity is how do we keep the essence and remove the friction. So we can take that billionaire's comment. I asked people what they want and I gave it to them. And that's it, simple. But within that, you can dig into it and say, there's a lot of things happening under the listening and research and trialing whatever they created to get to that community and those customers that they then how they see it. And so that's really kind of a, I wouldn't say complex, but it's a very involved process. Mm-hmm. But at the top, you need to be that clear. This is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to do it. And part of it is listening and communication and thinking through what is involved and having that mindset underneath it that says we need to adapt as we go, as we listen and as we learn, and then we can get what they want and then they'll buy it. Buying stuff for the sake of it is like, widgets. It goes back to value. Because a value could be an experience, not a product. A value could be an education. Okay, value starts to open things up into areas that are much wider and much deeper, and that comes from listening and communicating.
Very well said. Take that one away, everyone. It's a beautiful part. Let's talk about some brand principles in action.
Yep.
A brand is the most valuable real estate in the world. Why?
Well, we'll do a little exercise here for our listeners and our viewers that think of a brand that you really, really know, that you're very aware of what they do or the product or service. But it has to be a brand that you are not a customer of and you're never likely to be. So, for example, maybe you're thinking to yourself.
I was thinking of Nike straight away.
Yeah, but let's say people out there might say, I don't eat fast food, but I know McDonald's.
Yep.
Right. So that's a good example. Or I know Apple, but I'm a PC person. Yep. Right. I never go out.
Samsung
I'm Android. Right. So just think of something that you really know well, and you would never be a customer of. That goes to brand principle number 1, which is a brand is the most important, valuable real estate in the world, a corner of someone's mind and a relevant place in their life. So here you are, you have a brand that you know that you are not a customer of, and they're living rent-free in your head. Because you know about them, you're aware of them, you know enough about them to say they are the antithesis of who I am, but you still let them live in your head. And part of that is they're in my head because I see them every day. They just bombard. I can't get away from them, for example. Part of it could be I use them there as a benchmark for the industry, even though I don't like them and wouldn't be, but they're my benchmark. Part of it could be they're in my head because I absolutely hate them and they remind me every day of my ethics and values, whatever reason it might be. But that's all brand, because it's not just McDonald's, a word. It's the experience, the food, the menu, where they are, everything that we know about them is up here. And that is interesting because when we're talking about brands, brand profile, brand awareness doesn't mean everyone's a customer. It means that you have a value that people see you in society in a certain way as a benchmark or as a reference versus somebody else. And that is, and I should be clear, they're not my words. That a brand is the most valuable real estate in the world, corner of someone's mind. That was coined by a gentleman called Sir John Hegarty, who's an English advertising legend. He's got a great book, couple of books. And I got that in that book, and I went, fuck, that's a really, really great way to explain to people that brand isn't just about customers. Brand is about awareness. And that's why we let them live rent-free in our head.
And the beautiful thing about that I was just thinking of as you were saying that, even if they're thinking about you and you're not their cup of tea, for example, that's okay because you know who your audience is.
Yeah.
You don't have to try and be and people try to please everyone. We've got the people pleasers and they don't really know who they are or what they stand for.
Yeah.
It's a very confusing place to live. I lived there for a very long time. And then when I got very clear on my values and how I wanted to live my life, I guess the impact that I wanted to have, I was like, some people aren't going to like that. Yeah. I'm okay with that.
Yeah. And actually, you know, you're in good company because Phil Knight, who founded Nike, he said, you know, it doesn't matter if there's a whole bunch of people who hate your brand as long as enough people love it.
Simple once again.
Again. But what that says is the clarity behind what a brand means in someone's life, or the relevance or the reference it is, that clarity means that we can at least think about it. I love them, I hate them, whatever. I think one of the greatest threats to a brand is being absent-minded, as in absent from our mind. Because if we're not thinking about them, we're thinking about someone else.
Do you think that's why a lot of, I wouldn't say brands, but like, let's say social media influencers or even coaches are quite controversial because they want to sort of draw that line in the sand? You either hate me or you love me.
There's a couple of things going on there. I think that we have a culture right now which unfortunately is, if not rewarding, but definitely facilitating trolls and people who are out there who are trying to out controversy each other, and that's a really kind of low base, but it's getting a lot of eyeballs, mainly because of people like, yay, or I hate you, and you know, but there's a lot of...
You don't have to think too much to get involved in that. You can just throw more bloody pickles at the window.
Yeah. I think that's going to be an interesting space to watch over the next sort of few years, because there's a big backlash on that now, and there's some regulation coming in around that too, so that could change. But there's an old saying that all PR is good PR, right? And I think not really. I think that in today's day and age, with a hyper-connective, social media, shareable society we live in, it's very easy to paint yourself into a corner that if you do something controversial, and you go, oh, cool, we should keep doing that.
It becomes your brand. Like
then you can't be not that, because, and then just dig deeper, even if you don't like it, because you go, that's my brand now, I've got to do it, and go, no, you have control over this. If you do it deliberately to shift, how would you shift? Go back to that question, number one, what value do you provide? Don't be a troll, unless that's who you are. Fine, you know, Joe Rogan, go for your life. You know, so I don't know, but I think, you know, we'll use Nike again as an example. They did that amazing TV ad, Dream Crazy, with Colin Kaepernick. And he took his knee, knelt down in the national anthem at one of the
Super Bowls,
which is very controversial. And Nike said, we're going to do an ad called Dream Crazy, and he's going to voice it over. And it was, if you don't stand for something, believe in something, to sacrifice everything. I can't remember what the line was. But that was controversial. And you might look at it and say, Nike just jumped on the bandwagon and said, let's just get eyeballs and be controversial. Let's use Colin Kaepernick for our benefit. Well, behind the scenes, number one, Nike has been supporting African American athletes for decades. So that wasn't a jumping on the bandwagon thing. Two, they had him as one of the sponsored athletes for 2 years prior. Just hadn't done anything with him. Three, they said, we can't let this pass. We have to do something, even if we take a hit. We're going to have to do this. And sure enough, that ad went out. People were on social media burning Nike apparel, like throwing mud at Nike. It was a massive brand attack. And then there was another bunch of people who said, good on you. We believe in that. And as it turned out, Nike's sales rocketed. Their market value rocketed because enough people said the stand that you took isn't controversial. It's being clear to us what you stand for, and we believe in that. We're going to reward you.
Yep.
And they then went on and supported Colin Kaepernick after his NFL team, the 49ers, dropped him. They went on and did, like, he needed an income. We'll do a branded line with you. It's sold out in a day. So Nike went all in, regardless of what was happening. They knew it was going to come.
Yep.
All of the trolling and the backlash, because it was controversial. But if you do it for the right reasons, if you do it to stand up to your values and your beliefs,
yep,
then controversy can work. If you do it for the sake of it, again, designing deliberately your
ideal outcome.
Yeah, if you say, I just want eyeballs and I'll be controversial, but that's not who I am, it'll be who you become. But if you do it on your values and your beliefs, then it doesn't matter.
And it'll always rear its head. Like, if that's not who you
it'll come back and bite you.
You'll see something will... Like, I believe... I listen to Joe Rogan, but then I always listen to, like... twos and fro's, because I believe a lot of conversations aren't happening. And I think where... In the beginning, I was just like, yeah. And then I was like, I'm not challenging any of the conversations that are being had or why I believe that. And I think one of the traps that I fell into was I wasn't asking enough questions around information that I was consuming. I found stuff to support beliefs that I had. And then I'd have conversations with people who had counter, especially a lot on the podcast, with different beliefs. And then I'm sitting there going, never thought about that. And I would never challenge them because I hadn't thought about it. I don't like challenging people when I haven't thought about things enough. So now when people ask me a lot about masculinity and all of these sort of topics based around men's health, and there's a lot of them that I've never genuinely actually given enough thought or developed my own opinions, because I'm like, well, that's not the lane I'm running in at the moment. Yes, I understand it falls under the banner of men's health. However...
Well, a good thing there is, whatever information we get, it's like the social circle. Having a diverse social, whatever information we get, we should balance it out with, can we validate that from other sources?
Yes.
And if we can validate it, because you're right, we have a tendency to find what we're looking for.
Yes.
If we're in the same box. But if we move into other boxes and say, let me see what they're saying, that we either validate or challenge it. And I then sort of say, well, everyone can have an opinion. That's easy. Yes. The trick is having an informed opinion.
Correct.
And if we have an informed opinion, that's analysis. We've analyzed as many different angles as we can to have an informed opinion that sits with our beliefs that we want to either challenge or champion. And that's,
it's once again hard to do. And that's where I in the beginning, I would always throw out an opinion and not an informed opinion. And I learnt from backlash and, various other situations that came from that. I'm like, okay, well, where do I find the credible information? One thing I love podcasts for as well is being able to listen to people who can respectfully debate.
Yeah.
And they come from informed, like it's their bread and butter. Yeah. So then you can go, I never thought about that. That's a great question. Let me go look a little bit more, or I can appreciate that too, or I think you're off the mark.
Yep.
And it's just, I feel like there's not enough public spaces where that happens with credible people, which I wish it would, because there's a lot of people, once again, who are either, for example, listening to Joe Rogan or the flip side, whatever that just hang on that side, which, once again, completely fine. However, start
respectfully, as you say.
Yeah.
Because I think we need to get back to a point where we can respectfully disagree.
Correct. Yeah. And you're never going to always agree.
We're not
I was saying to a dude at our yesterday at the park, I was like, look, a lot of my family's from the bush, and I was out west 2 weeks ago, and I'm like, how they view the world and everything that's going on at the moment is very, very different to how people where we are right now in the middle of Brisbane view the world. And I can appreciate and understand why they think that way. I can also understand and appreciate why people think this way. And I don't think the people out there are ever going to get you to think any different or me to think any different, and vice versa. Nor if we're not, we used to have villages and little townships, and their way of doing things was okay, and that was their way of doing things, as long as you weren't.
And I think the key to that is kind of what you're talking about is education.
Correct.
Just being open to learning from different places. Because there's a really great conversation I had years ago with an incredible, very influential designer out of New York, a guy called Stefan Sagmeister, and we were talking about globalization, and there was a big pushback at the time around globalization. It was like homogenizing everything, and he said, yeah, well, I grew up in a small village I think it was in Austria, and he said, generations before me, girls were getting married at 14. So that had to change.
Yep.
So there's pros and cons to this sort of smaller villagey style thinking versus the global homogenized sort of thinking.
Yes.
And I think we just need to look as best we can with our values and our ethics and no other agenda and say, can we get the best of this and hack it and deliberately design it forward to improve?
Yeah.
That's, and again, simple, but very hard to do.
Oh, yeah.
On scale.
Yeah, on scale. It's big. Once again, you've got those trolls and you've got everything else being thrown in, and lack of the skills of communication, thinking, listening have not been developed by enough people to be able to.
Here's the thing, right? Here's the thing, and for our listeners who might be thinking, yeah, we agree, it's so overwhelming, we can't do anything. We can have a view to change the world, and that's hard. And then we can say, well, if we can't change the world, can we change someone else's world? So can we positively impact somebody else's world? And if we can't do that yet, let's just change our own world and build up to it. So this whole idea of it's too hard, I'm just going to check out, I don't have an impact on this. I think we do if we come back to ourselves again and say, how do I want to show up in the world? How do I want to live? How do I want to impact other people? Because that has a knock-on effect. That's contagious. And I always look at it and say, if we want to change the world, well, in the political sort of arena, you say one vote at a time. But in our own world, we say one act at a time. We can change our world. We can change other people's world. And then when you aggregate that might just go up a bit further. So this is the ripple effect again. You change your world, pebble drops. Change someone else's world, the ripple. Change someone in their world, the ripple. So I believe that we are in a position right now in the world where it can look very overwhelming to change the status quo. So we just check out and go, well, I can't. And we need to remember that we can change in small part what's happening in our life that may well have a ripple effect elsewhere. That I think that's something we need to get back to. We don't need to change the world, but we could help a whole bunch of people do it, one act at a time.
Focus on what you can control.
Yeah.
Kev, where can everyone find you? So on socials, where can people buy the book? Don't forget we're giving away 3 books. Everyone, so stay tuned on Instagram to see how that's going down.
And I would genuinely love to hear feedback about the book. I mean, I'm not saying I've got answers. I'm not saying this is, a book that will change your world, your life. But what I am saying is that over the 30 years that I have been in practice, and I've tried to just put as much as I've known into this book that is a much broader book. I would love to hear your feedback if you do come to read it. So you can find me on Instagram at just_Kevin_Finn. LinkedIn, Kevin Finn. You can get the book in Australia and New Zealand at the moment through Booktopia. And I'm just setting up my website to do international orders because unfortunately Booktopia's international distributor shut down in April. So we're trying to figure out how we fix that, and it's not as smooth as we'd like. So I'm just going to do it off my website soon.
Awesome. Kev, thank you so much for coming on. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you for having
guys,
me.
I do truly recommend this book. For those who see my book list on socials, it will be in there. But, mate, watching you over the last 12 or so months, the consistency that you show up with, the integrity, and then also getting to learn more about how your mind works has been an absolute privilege. Thank you for coming on.
Likewise. Thank you so much.